Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Business Talk Library, and today I have a great interview for you today with Jeff Katz. And the reason why I think this one is great is because, there's a couple of things that you will experience as you're building a business and going through that stage. And part of that is, your product strategy, and it's figuring that journey out. And believe me, it is a journey. It's not going to be a one and done. So I wanted to bring Jeff Katz on to talk about, his background, his experience in that area, and the awesome company that he's working with. So welcome to the show, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really, really good. Glad to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely, my pleasure. Now, before we jump into, like, say, your role, with, chief product and strategy, what was your background before coming to, the current company you're at?
Yeah, so I'm kind of been in the digital marketing tech space for a very long time, so maybe 15 years. And so working for companies like Verizon Media, formerly AOL, some mid-sized companies and small startups, but essentially throughout the whole time, my specialty has been in running business incubation units for these companies. So essentially starting up new products and services. And it's very interesting, a big company that's trying to innovate versus a mid-sized company and small size. There's a lot of really interesting things that happen. And I learned a lot from my experience in the digital marketing tech space. And then in my last role, I had the fortunate opportunity to work for a computer vision company that was looking to diversify into other areas in addition to digital marketing. And so that's where, when I came in and realized, wow, computer vision could be used to really innovate in sports and how you measure the value of sponsorships. So what I did before FanAI was basically built a division called Gum Gum Sports that basically looks at all of the branding in a field or a court, all of the ads, so to speak. But instead of doing it manually and having people with stopwatches count the number of seconds that it's on the screen, we automated it. And we used computer vision to basically look at not just the TV broadcast, but also social media and all the branding that people get, that Coke, Pepsi, any of the big brands out there get, be able to quantify the value from a media standpoint. And that's kind of what I did prior to joining FanAI.
I mean, and that's a very interesting one because my background is accounting and finance. So from a finance standpoint, is one of the questions we usually ask the marketing team is, hey, what's my ROI on giving you this money for the marketing dollars?
Totally.
So it's
Yeah,
very interesting to be able, like I said, to capture that data, because I think that's a critical part of, being able to answer that finance question the finance team asks.
absolutely. And that's kind of why, that's actually why I joined FanAI, is because, so the concept of media value is, that's kind of the currency in sponsorships and sports, on how you, as a brand or as a team or a league, understand the value of, say, TV visible signage, right? So when a brand appears on the screen, whether it's TV or social media, what's the value from a media perspective? What would it have cost to go and purchase that media? And and it's helpful to know that, but it doesn't answer the underlying question, which is kind of what you were saying, which is, but what's my ROI? Like, what is my return on my investment? And that's why I met the founder of FanAI, Johannes, and he, was very passionate from kind of his background in solving this problem, and basically saying, look, if I'm a big brand and I'm spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year on sponsorships, how do I actually go and see whether people are actually spending more on my products because of the investment? And that's what got me really excited to take on this new opportunity.
Awesome, awesome. So I mean, well, let's talk a little bit more about Fan AI. I mean, when you thought about, Fan AI compared to, other places that you worked, other than what you just mentioned, were there other differences that attracted you to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, from a culture perspective, I really thought or felt and still feel that the culture in FanAI was one that I loved. I thought, just in general, here's a group of people who are looking to really do something that's never been done before, disrupt an industry with something that we know the industry wants and needs. But until now, there's not only has the product not been in existence, but people kind of didn't believe that it was possible, which is why media valuation and custom surveys around brand awareness and purchase consideration, those are kind of the norm. And I'm not saying those need to go away, but there's never been kind of an understanding that we could solve this problem. We could actually tie a fan base to how they purchase with a brand. So that, I mean, I just, from a career standpoint, I love, when possible, I love to follow the passion, because then when you're putting in the long hours, it's much easier when it's something that you're passionate about. Clearly, if you're producing as many segments as you are per week, you've got to be passionate about what you're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that is a phenomenal thing. Like I said, what you said about when possible, because I do think, like I said, that there have been phases where it wasn't possible. When I was working in public accounting, like it wasn't possible for me to follow my passion then. But I think it's like long term is finding opportunities to do that now.
For
One
sure.
of the things I'm curious about is, as you think about, the role of, product and strategy, with a company that already had, like I said, an environment and a philosophy that attracted you, how do you come in the door and start to make your impact on the product and the strategy journey?
Well, so with a bold kind of vision and goal for the company, it's not something that could be built really quickly. And so FanAI, before I got there, looked quite different. Um, and this is not saying that FanAI did the wrong thing. FanAI basically was doing the best it could on delivering on the long-term vision of the company, which is to solve that question of, am I getting more because I invested in a team or a league? They were doing, they had lines of business that were driving revenue now, while they were putting in kind of the framework to be able to solve the ultimate big question. So whereas the company previously was kind of focused on servicing esports rights holders, so teams and leagues around the esports ecosystem, which was exploding at the time and still is, the strategy and partnerships to enable the longer term vision, that's what, when I came on, I was able to help accelerate and kind of think about how do we get there more quickly. And once we identified a couple of things that we can do to accelerate our path to that, then it became about, all right, we need to now focus all of our attention on solving the long-term problem that we're all here to solve. So we had to make some difficult decisions around where to focus our energy, and now we are 100% focused on solving the real spend question for sponsorship measurement. And really that we have doubled down, and some of the strategic decisions that were made were really about, how do we scale this and do it in a way that'll work when a company, a brand, will want to roll this out to, say, 100 different teams or properties.
Gotcha. Awesome. Awesome. So, I mean, when you talk about, defining kind of that real spin, and I know you mentioned esports and you mentioned teams and brands, what are the types of industries, or what do Fan AI's customer base usually look like? So who would be their target audience?
Absolutely. So the folks who can benefit the most right now from the platform would be the largest spenders in sports and sponsorships. Within that group, I'd say CPG companies, like the beverage companies that spend a lot in sports, or quick serve restaurants. Those are kind of the sweet spot right now, because people are transacting with those companies very frequently, and and those brands are very pervasive in sports. So you could really look at it and say, hey, for a particular brand, how are the fan bases across MLB, NFL, NHL? How are they spending with your brand, and how does that compare to a control group of fan or of people who look like those fans but weren't exposed to the sponsorship? And that's how you answer the question of incrementality, because you can answer the question of how much are they spending with you, but you might say, well, they would have spent that with me anyway. And that's why there needs to be some element of a control group.
Gotcha. No, that makes perfect sense. And one of the things I'm curious is when you think about, for a company or a league or a team or a big brand that's reaching out to Fan AI, what does that, that working relationship look like? Like, what would that experience be for the client?
Yeah. So from a client perspective, these big brands, there are lots of different areas of their business or roles and responsibilities that want this data, right? You have the head of sports or the head of sports who's reporting up into the CMO, who's asking for more transparency and more metrics, because the CMO is getting all sorts of metrics from the marketing side, from TV, from online advertising. Like, there's an explosion of metrics. And now they're going and turning around to the sports guys and saying, hey, we'd love to see, some of these metrics that we're used to seeing on the traditional marketing side. So they love it. They love to be able to have similar kinds of metrics to what the folks on the other side of the marketing spectrum have at their company. But then you also have the regional sponsorship managers who are running what's called activations or promotions, in the different markets. And they want to know, are these working? When we give away a free sandwich or, do those kinds of promotions, like, do they actually drive not just the initial lift in sales, but an ongoing lift in engagement with those retail locations for the fan base? So the regional sponsorship managers and then the agencies that support the brands as well, they love it because they then get to engage on a more strategic level and do more analysis to add value. So and then you also have analytics groups within the brand that run regression analyses and do all sorts of complicated modeling and attribution models, marketing mix models. And they love it too, to get their hands on the raw data to be able to plug it into their models so that sports can really take its place alongside the other marketing channels.
Awesome. So now if someone is interested in doing business with FanAI, or they want to, follow the story and see what FanAI is up to, where can they find you guys online or on social media?
Yeah, I mean, the website's pretty easy. It's just fan.ai. And you can also just go onto LinkedIn and type in FanAI or search for my name, Jeffrey Katz, and we'd be happy to start the conversation and really start talking about your business strategically and how we can add more transparency and accountability to these spends, especially now that we're in a COVID world. I know everyone talks about it. You can't get through anything without saying COVID, but it really does align with this idea that there needs to be more accountability for every dollar that's spent to make sure that it's being put to good use.
Absolutely. As a finance person, I was like, that's music to my ears.
Awesome.
Well, before we wrap up the interview, one of the questions that I like to ask every guest that comes on is, when you think about, your expertise and you think about, your background, what's two pieces of advice that you would share with other business owners?
Great question. I think getting to an MVP, a minimum viable product, as quickly as possible and really understanding what that means is very important, because as an entrepreneur or as someone who's trying to disrupt the market, you really need to validate your product as quickly as possible. And let's say it's not right. You need to know that very quickly so that you can adjust and compensate before you run out of money, right? Just on a very basic level. So so certainly when we say validating the product as quickly as possible, how do you validate a product? You get someone to pay for it. So if you can do that, I mean, growing revenue, it's one of several good ways to reduce burn, which is just one benefit. But I'd say that would be the first piece of advice is get to your MVP as quickly as possible and be able to sell that as early as possible so you can learn from the market and truly validate what you're trying to do. I'd say the second thing is just bringing new disruptive products to market. It's often accompanied, pretty much every time accompanied by a lot of curveballs. It's never easy. It's often thankless, and one of the hardest things to do is to navigate those curveballs and just do whatever it takes to push through. And that's where, when we talked about before, it's really essential to have passion, about what you're doing in the product and be mission driven. Because without that, I mean, I don't know how one would motivate to do that. So I'd say that's probably the second one.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you for being in the interview, sharing your story, the wisdom and the insights, and we'll definitely include some links so people can follow FanAI and they can get in touch with you guys, because you're providing, like I said, a very valuable service that I think that's the question that a lot of brands and companies are trying to figure out is, hey, are we putting the money in the right place that's going to lead to growth? So thank you for coming on.
Of course, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Business Talk Library. If you like our content, be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want to see more of our exclusive content, you can subscribe and become a member on patreon.com/Business Talk Library. Hey, the Business Talk Library is the place where business makes sense.